Hello, good morning. Welcome back to Retroschaft. It is a beautiful Saturday today, and I thought it would be the perfect time to come in here and work a bit on the MGB. Now, I think a lot of you haven't seen this car before. I've talked about it on my personal Instagram at RobinWTR, and if you want to know the full story behind this car, you can head over there, and there's like a permanent story or permanent highlight or whatever you want to call it. And in there, I talk about the entire story of the car, me acquiring it and modifying it a little bit. But over the past winter, I've also been working a lot on this car, and I thought it would be the perfect time now to introduce you to this project and to then take you along the current ride of modifications that I'm doing, see you finishing me this car, or see me finishing this car. And then in like a couple of weeks, couple of months maybe, I think 4 to 5 weeks, we can take it out for the first time again, and it will be like new. So in this video, I plan to go over this project, tell you a little bit of a backstory behind this car, and then we're also going to get some work done. Now, I think a lot of you haven't seen this car before, at least those of you who don't follow me on Instagram. So I think it's best to just start with uncovering the car. This is just an old blanket that's laying on top of it. It's quite dusty in this garage, so it gives just a little bit of protection. So let's start with that. Let's take a look at the car and go over everything that I talked about in the intro. So this is it, a red MGB. It's a 4-cylinder, 1800cc. It's got around 95 horsepower. The original engine is not in this car anymore. It's a new engine. One of the previous owners put it in. But to be honest, it's kind of like an extra safety. I know this car is going to run. I know the engine is in a good state, or at least that's kind of what I'm going off. And it's kind of good to know, like, these old engines are sometimes maybe a little bit less reliable, or need a little bit of a rebuild, or need a little bit honing out of the cylinder. So it's overall good to know that this car is in a good state, mechanically at least. And yeah, that's good to know. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of a walk around first. You can see down here is the rear axle that is currently of the car, and we'll be working on that later today because that is one of the only things that needs finishing. The front suspension is there, and also a lot of it is in this closet down here. There's also stuff on the bench, but that's something that we'll take a look at later. Let's talk about the car for a little bit. It is a MGB from 1969. It's a really good car. It doesn't really have a lot of rust. There's like a little bit here, which is not too bad because kind of all MGBs have rust at that spot. I went to look at another car, a MG Sebring build, really cool car, but it had like an open top and a lot of rust here in the light sills. And yeah, I walked away from it, even though it was a very cool car. And then I kind of bought this car. Very original, except for the engine. And yeah, I kind of like the look of it. These rally-style front lights were on the car already. And I did change the steering wheel, so we'll take a look at the inside next. It's pretty dark inside the car, so I took like quite a big light with me to shine inside the car. I think it gives just enough light to give you a look inside the car and get a feel for how it looks. So originally, there was a bigger steering wheel on this car. I think like a wooden steering wheel, Motor Lita style, like this one, of 38 centimeter circumference. I think something like that. This one is around 32. It's a lot smaller. And for me personally, it is also a little bit better because I'm quite big, and the other wheel would often touch my knees or touch my legs, which is not really what you want when you're driving on some twisty back roads. One of the things that really got me into this car was the shift knob, the gear lever. I think that is absolutely beautiful. It's a lot of fun to shift with this car. It's very tactile, very mechanical, and I think that is one of the reasons why MGBs are a lot of fun to drive. And another reason is because this car has a monocoque chassis, so the chassis is built into parts of the body. It's really stiff, the steering is extremely direct, and it makes driving on back roads a lot of fun. The only thing that I'm missing is a little bit more power. I would like maybe 110, 120 horsepower, but I think that's something for the future. It's not something that I'm going to tackle this winter, but it is something that I want to get done in like the next year, and then this car will be sorted like there's no tomorrow, really. Now let's get on to the more important stuff. What have I been doing to this car for the past 5 months, and what still needs to be done to this car in the next few weeks? That is something which we still need to talk about. So I noticed last year when I was driving the car that the suspension wasn't really that good. It didn't really feel very solid when I was driving on like wet roads, or just it felt kind of flimsy. And I think I found quite a few reasons when redoing the suspension why it felt flimsy or why it felt wrong. So let's go around the car again and look at what I intend to change, because I still need to put everything back together. So quite obviously you can see here that the rear axle is completely off the car. The rear suspension is completely off the car. There's nothing like, basically there's nothing of any kind of suspension on this car still. And as you can see here, I redid the rear brakes of the passenger side. I still need to do the ones on the driver's side. I do have all the parts, I just need to put it together. This rear axle is also going to get a new layer of paint. Then if we go to the front suspension, it is completely off as well. There's nothing under here except for the steering rack. And then there's also the exhaust, that's also completely off. And I'm going to put on a different exhaust, a Tourist Trophy exhaust, which is kind of a racing exhaust. I'm thinking it's going to sound a little bit more throaty. It did have quite a good sound already. You can see there's almost like no cat in the middle, and then also just a small cat at the back. So it did sound quite sporty already, but I would like a little bit more sound inside the car. And a racing exhaust is going to do just that. Now, I do have some poly bushes for this car, made by Super Pro. They are right here. And this is very good stuff. Like, they are not just very cool to look at because they are purple. They also feel very solid, and I've read a lot of good things about these. So that's something that still needs to be changed, because the suspension is now still fully off the car, so this will come in handy in like a few weeks when I put everything back together. There's still like a lot of stuff in here. And then if we go to the rear suspension, like the rear leaf springs, you can see that these bushes have already been pushed in. Oops, that's heavier than I expected. So yeah, it's difficult to see, but those are already in. So that's pretty much the modification list. Project creep kind of got to me on this car. I started working on it just with the intention to quickly change the bushes over like 1 or 2 months and then get it back on the road. But it completely spiraled out of control with like almost a nut and bolt restoration of the entire suspension of the car. Then when I wanted to take the rear axle off, I noticed that I had to take the entire exhaust off. That got me into looking at different exhausts, and it just got the snowball rolling even more. So this car is going to feel like new. The suspension is going to be completely rebuilt, and that is the very good part. I'm really excited to see this car on the road again. I bought new rear shocks. I replaced all of the bolts. I have new bushings, as you just saw. And I think it's going to make for a much more solid drive, and I'm looking forward to taking it out again and obviously taking you for the ride. So with that all being said, I think it's time to get some actual work done. I want to try and put the driver's side of the brakes back together. The last time that I did this, or when I did this on the passenger side, we were with 2. I'm going to give it a try alone now, because I really want to finish the brakes. It will look a lot cleaner and a lot more done when the drum brake covers are on again. So I want to start with that. Please bear with me, I don't know if it's going to work, but yeah, we'll see. Maybe it's not a bad thing to also quickly mention that I am not like a certified mechanic or anything. I just do these things because I love them. I like working on cars, and that's basically it. So if you see me doing something wrong, it's possible. I'm human, and yeah, I'm just trying to do my best here. Let's see how this goes. I have all the necessary parts here beside me. I'm going to use the other side of the axle as a reference to see how everything is put together, because these brakes have like a certain way how they need to go on there, like the holes are different. So I need to see on the other side how to do that, and yeah, let's hope everything works out okay. Let's get going. Okay, so spoiler alert, everything did go quite smoothly, but I ended up filming every single little step, and the video footage amounted to approximately 45 minutes of me fiddling with the entire brake system on the rear. So I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do a little voiceover and explain you what I'm doing as we go along, because that is going to be much quicker and much more enjoyable to watch. So right here I have put on a little part which basically keeps the brake pads away from each other, and it also allows you to adjust how far they are away from the actual brake drum. So when everything is actually put back together and the rear axle is on the car, we have to adjust this part right here to make sure the brake pads are only like a fraction of a millimeter away from the brake drum, so that when we push the brake we have immediate brake pressure. Otherwise the brakes are going to go way too much to the inside of the brake drum assembly, and that is not something that we want. Right here I'm just tightening down the bolts of this little part, and I try to do that as evenly as possible. Right here you can see that only at the end I am applying a lot of pressure on these bolts on both sides. In the beginning I try to adjust them evenly and tighten them down evenly. This is the actual brake cylinder. It needs to go on there with a little clip, and this is where the actual brake fluid goes into the brake system. It goes into that little brake cylinder there, and it pushes the brake pads away from each other onto the brake drum cover or onto the brake drum, and then we actually have braking power. And that's a very satisfying clunk right there, which is the clip which is going to keep the brake cylinder on to the brake drum cover. Right here I'm just trying to rotate the clip a little bit, because on the top there we have a small hole where the bleeding nipple has to be put into the brake cylinder, and obviously it's kind of blocked by the little clip, so we can't put it on there right now, but this should do the trick right here, and now we can put the bleeding nipple back on there. And there we go. Obviously the bleeding nipple is a very important part to basically get all the air out of the brake system. Next we have the hand brake mechanism, and here we can get a very nice view of, on the top, the brake cylinder, and on the bottom the part which is used to push the brake pads just enough away from each other onto the brake drum to get immediate brake pressure when the brake is used. Right here we have the brake pads, and on the MGB I'm not really sure how this is on other cars, but on the MGB there's a multitude of little springs and everything. It's a very fiddly process to put this back together, and I'm going to speed this up in a second so we get a quick overview of what is happening here, because otherwise we'd be here for the rest of the day, and that's not something that I intend to do right now. So there's a few springs on the inside of the entire assembly, but also on the outside of the assembly, and then we also have a spring that needs to go on the handbrake mechanism. So right now I'm doing the inside springs, and in the brake cylinder and the other part on the bottom there are these little slots where the brake pads need to go in. And at the same time these springs need to be put on there. So as I said, it's a very fiddly process. This was a case of putting it together, taking it off again, putting it back together. It's a pure case of trial and error, but perseverance is obviously key here. And if you keep trying long enough, eventually everything will work out quite nicely. And right here, the only spring that's left is the one that keeps the handbrake mechanism together. And when that is pushed on there nicely, we are finished with this part of the brake assembly. The only thing that's left now is to put these little springs that I have right here on the brake pads themselves, and they basically keep the brake pads in place. They keep them onto the brake drum cover, because as you just saw, there is a little bit of lateral movement in the brake pads, and with these little springs, that lateral movement is going to be completely eliminated, and we will have like a very solid braking system. That's basically the last part of this brake assembly, and yeah, we can almost continue with the rest of the build then. Doesn't it always just look extremely good to have new parts on your car? I don't know about you guys, but I love the look of like the fresh black with these gold parts. I know this will be behind the drum brake cover, but just knowing that everything is new in there just feels very, very nice. So now this side is done. This side is done, and I think it's time to put on the drum brake covers. I repainted these a few weeks ago, so let's give these a clean and put them on as well. Well, actually that looks clean. And then there we go. So here we are. This has been apart for probably the last month, maybe even 2 months. And it's a very nice feeling to see this back together. Obviously, right now it doesn't look as clean anymore because all the new parts are inside. But yeah, it's still good to see like that this is back together. So that's going to be it for this video. I'm going to finish the other side in a second. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I am glad that I got to introduce this car and this project to you guys. I am very much looking forward to take you along on the ride to finishing this car and taking it back onto the road for the very first time. I'll make sure that you are there with me as well to experience that first drive in like 5 months, 6 months. I have no idea. A lot of things are still going to happen through this car. I would like to upgrade the engine in the future, but for now it's just a suspension, just the brakes, and it'll be, I mean, I think that I started taking you along for the ride at the right time, at the most fun time. Everything is ready, it's almost ready to go back together, and then it's ready to drive, make road trips and the like. So that's obviously what's waiting for us this summer, and yeah, I'm happy to take you along for that ride as well. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.